I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Margaret Naughton, here today. Dr. Naughton works as a clinical pastoral educational supervisor and healthcare chaplain at University Hospital, Kerry. We saw this week that the report of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Assisted Dying was debated in Dáil Éireann. In 2023, Dr. Naughton gave evidence before the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Assisted Dying, asserting that legislation to permit assisted suicide, euthanasia, would gravely undermine the right to life and genuine healthcare. She speaks from a place of expertise in this area, as well as a breadth of personal experience through her work in Kerry Hospital. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Naughton.
Thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today in a city that is very close to my heart. I spent many years here in Cork at UCC, so I always love an opportunity to come back to Cork. So I suppose my few words today, and I'm delighted to get an opportunity to give you an insight into my experience and my work, and I hope my passion for this area will come across too today. I'm going to start my few words with just a little reframing or a little review of the statement that we presented to the Houses of the Oireachtas in December. And then I hope to speak a little bit out of my own experience working as a healthcare chaplain for the last 15 years and as an educator of future generation chaplains. And apologies to any of you who've read the statement and may know the statement nearly better than I do myself at this stage, but I always think it's good to have something to ground our conversation and reflection in. So I suppose a real important starting point for us when we were putting together the statement last December was a reminder that care, compassionate care of the sick and the dying is an integral part of the Church's mission. And we know that, we see that from any delving into Scripture. Jesus' primary ministry was amongst the sick, amongst those who needed support and compassion. As a Catholic community, and as a church community, we are deeply opposed to the deliberate ending of life at any stage. And a reminder, I suppose, a very strong thread of our statement was a reminder that life is a gift which we hold in trust at all times and at all stages from beginning to natural end. And I guess our insight or our motivation for what we ended up putting together was a conversation around the common good and how detrimental implementing any type of, legislation that would go against the common good. The state has a responsibility to uphold the common good, and assisted dying, assisted suicide undermines the common good as we see it in 4 different ways. Hope and healing in the face of terminal illness. People can be helped to express and experience human growth and spiritual development and find inner peace even in the face of a terminal diagnosis. Our second point, the holistic care for terminally ill patients who may come to see themselves as a burden to family or to self. So motivated here is a compassionate and caring approach to the care of the terminally ill and the dying. Assisted dying, assisted suicide also brings into, really challenges the whole integral component of trust in healthcare. If any of you have ever worked in healthcare and if you've experienced being part of healthcare, trust is an integral part of what we're about. If you don't trust your doctor, if you don't trust your chaplain, if you don't trust your nurse, then there is no relationship. So assisted dying, assisted suicide brings into conflict the trust that healthcare is built upon. And finally, when we move into a liberalisation or any perceived liberalisation of care of the sick and the dying, we open the floodgates to all sorts of challenges to the dignity and respect of the human person at all stages in life, but certainly in the face of a terminal diagnosis. So that very quick summary of the statement that we would have presented to the House of the Oireachtas last December. So now I want to move more, I suppose, from the head to the heart, if you like. That journey often can be a complex one, but I hope I'm going to speak at this stage away from the head, but more into the heart, and from the experience of ministering to people over the last 15 years who are facing their own, I suppose, their own mortality and the end of their own natural life. As I just to say, coming from a place of ministering to people from a pastoral care perspective, what's integral to what we're about is compassion. And I think sometimes in the maybe the difficulty and the emotive aspect of this whole debate, sometimes we can forget about compassion. But I believe that as a chaplain, we begin to accompany those who are sick and dying from a place of compassion, from a place of deep empathy, from meeting people where they're at, by giving them an opportunity to tap into their own inner resources. Oftentimes, I think we talked a little bit in our statement about hope and healing, but I think very often it can be hard, understandably so, to find hope in the face of death, hope in the face of a devastating diagnosis, hope in the face of deep uncertainty. And yet I think what I feel a lot of our work is about is accompanying people with hope, with compassion, helping them to see that even in the face of a terminal diagnosis, even in the face of maybe uncertain future, that hope can be found. Now, I'm in no way, demeaning the suffering and the struggle that comes with this. And I'm not here as an expert, and I'm not here to, in any way dismiss the struggle and the pain of facing a terminal diagnosis, of facing an uncertain future. But ultimately, where we all need support is when we are devoid of meaning, when we are devoid of hope. And oftentimes I think we might all be guilty, and I certainly am guilty of it as a practitioner, of focusing or overly focusing on the suffering component of, or maybe the loss of such a diagnosis, or the loss of someone's mortality in the face of a diagnosis. But ultimately, and I know from my own experience, great hope, great meaning can be found within the context of something as devastating as realising that your life is coming to a natural end. And yet I believe as Christians, we believe we are Easter people, we are resurrection people. And I think part of our message is to bring that to the bedside, to bring it to the pastoral context, to remind people that in their struggle, in their challenge to make sense of what's going on for them, that actually hope can still be harnessed, that meaning can still be found, that their life has value no matter how long their life is going to last. It's a challenge, and I think more and more as the conversation around assisted dying, assisted suicide gathers momentum, it's almost offered as an alternative. And yet I can genuinely say this, and I say this with no sense of, insincerity. In 15 years, I think I've only spoken to one person who, in the face of a terminal diagnosis, would wish that that option to end their own life, would be there for them. I think most of us, we operate out of that palliative care axiom, living well naturally until the very end of life. And I think most of us in healthcare strive to do that. Now, of course, we're human. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes we're not as good at it maybe as we could be. But we do strive to meet people where they're at. We strive to see them as in their inherent dignity and worth as a human person. And we strive to see them as made in the image and likeness of God. And coming from that space, I think we offer them an opportunity to do a life review, to explore their own story, to find meaning in their own story, to find meaning in their own experience. So all life has value, no matter what. And I suppose in my own ministry over the last number of years, I've had a great, and I always say that the complement, spiritual, pastoral, emotional, of the sick and the dying is a great privilege. And coming from that space, I've had great privilege to minister to people across the spectrum, people who are people of faith, people who are maybe struggling with faith, people who are young, people not so young. And all they want, generally what they want, is to be heard, to be supported, to be encouraged, to be empowered in some way to make sense of what's going on for them. Because I think, we draw from Friedrich Nietzsche, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And I think when meaning can be found in the gravest of situations, people can find peace. People can find solace. They come to a place of usually natural acceptance of what's going on for them. Can be a very painful place. It's not easy to find yourself in that place of agony. I often refer to that place of agony in the garden for people who are trying to make sense of what's going on for them. So coming from that place, I suppose that place of pastoral care, that place of spiritual accompaniment, is an awareness. I suppose it drives my passion to try and articulate and verbalise maybe the complexity of this overall debate in terms of the assisted dying. It is an emotive issue. It is a challenging issue. It is one where oftentimes it can be difficult to defend in the face of human suffering. But that said, as Christians, we are called to accompany people just as Jesus did, with compassion, non-judgmentally, with empathy and with mercy. And I hope that as this debate continues, that each of us, wherever we find ourselves on the continuum of this debate, that at all times our discussions will be framed not with judgment, not with condemnation, not with anger, but with heartfelt compassion, mercy and empathy. And my final point today is maybe as it was mentioned earlier, we're looking at maybe a general election fairly soon. There's all sorts of discussions out there at the moment in the public square about this issue. But my call to each of you is to dig into that place within ourselves where we hold our own judgments, where we hold our own value system, and dig into it and remember that for each of us, that this whole area is not just something we're called to reflect on, maybe to defend, depending on where you're at, but that it is for us an ethical and moral responsibility. In fact, I would say it's an ethical and moral imperative that we continue this conversation. Because if we don't continue this conversation, we know where this is going to go. So it does take great courage. A number of people said to me during the week, I can't believe you're going out and you're going to talk about this on Saturday. It does take courage. Sometimes it's easier to keep quiet and hold silent. But we have a call. Jesus made it difficult for each of us. Christianity is difficult. It's a difficult call to defend the other, to defend those who are struggling, to defend the voiceless, to defend those on the margins. And yet, Father Gregory Boyle, a Jesuit priest in America, speaks very much about going to the margins, not to fix, not to sort, but to be transformed ourselves. And I firmly believe the more passionate we are, the more we go out there and advocate on this issue, hopefully we will bring about great change, but also each of us will be transformed in a very meaningful way, because when we touch the wounds of another person, we are truly transformed in a very meaningful, authentic and congruent way. God bless you all.